On a cold Tuesday night in Dallas, Texas, 72-year-old Robert Jameson collapsed in the hallway of his $10 million mansion. The security guard walking past assumed he had simply stumbled after an evening of wine. The chef finishing up in the kitchen heard nothing over the hum of the industrial dishwasher. Even the butler, polishing silverware in the dining room, remained unaware that his employer was lying unconscious just 30 feet away. But there was one person who noticed. A woman who had been invisible to almost everyone in that house for the past 8 years. A woman whose name most of the household staff couldn't even pronounce correctly. Her name was Rosa Martinez, and she was about to do something that would change not just Robert Jameson's life, but her own, in ways she could never have imagined. What happened next would spark a legal battle that made national headlines, tear apart one of Dallas's wealthiest families, and raise questions that still haunt courtrooms across America today. Because sometimes, the person you've looked past your entire life is the only one standing between you and death, and what you do after they save you reveals who you truly are. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Robert Jameson was. Born in Houston in 1951, Robert inherited a modest oil drilling business from his father when he was just 28 years old. But Robert wasn't interested in modest. He was ambitious, ruthless when he needed to be, and brilliant at seeing opportunities that others missed. By the time he was 40, he had transformed his father's small operation into Jameson Energy Solutions, a company worth over $3 billion. He expanded into renewable energy before it was fashionable, invested in technology startups that everyone else thought were crazy, and made deals that left even seasoned Wall Street investors shaking their heads in admiration. By his 60s, Robert had everything American success is supposed to look like: a sprawling estate in Highland Park, one of Dallas's most exclusive neighborhoods, a private jet that could take him anywhere in the world on a moment's notice, memberships at clubs where the waiting list was 10 years long and the annual fees cost more than most people's houses. But if you asked the people who worked for him, they would tell you a different story. They would tell you about a man who remembered the names of his business partners but forgot the names of the people who served him dinner every night. A man who could charm investors and politicians but barely made eye contact with the woman who cleaned his bathroom. A man who gave millions to charity for the tax write-offs and the photo opportunities, but would argue over a $5 discrepancy in a housekeeper's paycheck. Robert's wife, Patricia, had died 6 years earlier from ovarian cancer. They had 3 children together. Michael, the oldest at 45, was the CEO of a tech startup that his father had funded but largely ignored. Elizabeth, 42, spent most of her time in New York managing what she called her art consulting business, which was really just an expensive hobby funded by her trust fund. And then there was Jonathan, 38, the youngest, who had bounced between business ventures and relationships with the kind of aimless energy that comes from having too much money and too little purpose. After Patricia died, the mansion became quieter. The dinner parties stopped. The holiday gatherings became obligatory and tense. Robert threw himself even deeper into his work, traveling constantly, making deals, building his empire higher and higher, as if he could construct something tall enough to escape the loneliness. The children visited, less and less. Michael was always too busy with his company. Elizabeth claimed she couldn't stand Texas weather anymore. Jonathan showed up mainly when he needed money, which was often. The staff noticed the change. The house that once buzzed with life now felt more like a museum, and Robert, despite being surrounded by employees and having more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, was profoundly alone. That's where Rosa Martinez entered the picture, though entered isn't quite the right word. Rosa had been working in that house for 8 years, but if you asked Robert to describe her before that night, he probably couldn't have told you much beyond the fact that she cleaned and she was Mexican. Rosa was 39 years old when she took the job at the Jameson mansion. She had come to the United States from Oaxaca, Mexico, when she was 22, carrying nothing but a backpack and the phone number of a cousin in Dallas. She left behind her mother, her 3 younger siblings, and a village where opportunities were as scarce as the rain. For years, she worked 3 jobs, cleaning houses during the day, washing dishes at a restaurant in the evening, and doing overnight janitorial work at an office building on weekends. She sent most of her money home. Her mother needed heart medication. Her youngest brother wanted to go to school. Her sister had 2 children and a husband who drank more than he worked. Rosa became their lifeline. Every month, she wired money back to Oaxaca. Every birthday and holiday, she called, always cheerful, never complaining, even though she was exhausted to her bones. She met Carlos, a construction worker from Honduras, at a community church in East Dallas. They fell in love the way working people do, in the stolen hours between shifts, over cheap tacos at a food truck, sharing dreams that felt impossible but necessary to keep going. They got married at City Hall on a Thursday afternoon because that was Carlos's only day off. Rosa wore a white dress she had bought at a thrift store for $12. Their wedding reception was at a friend's apartment with homemade tamales and a Bluetooth speaker playing bachata. They had a son, Diego, 2 years after they got married. Rosa worked until the morning her water broke, and she was back at work 3 weeks after giving birth because they couldn't afford for her to take more time off. Carlos worked construction, but the work was seasonal and unpredictable. Some months were good. Most months were tight. They lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots weren't uncommon and where everyone knew everyone else's business because your business was survival. When Rosa got the job at the Jameson mansion through an agency that specialized in domestic staff for wealthy families, it felt like a miracle. The pay was $15 an hour, which was more than she had ever made. The hours were Monday through Friday, 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, which meant she could pick Diego up from school. She was supposed to be responsible for cleaning the second-floor bedrooms, the hallways, the library, and Robert's private study. It was hard work. The house was enormous, but it was steady, it was reliable, and that meant everything. Rosa quickly became one of those employees who fade into the background of wealthy homes. She was punctual, thorough, and quiet. She never asked questions. She never complained. She moved through the house like a ghost, cleaning up after a man who barely acknowledged her presence. Robert occasionally left notes on her timesheet. Lamp in guest room needs dusting. Bathroom mirror has streaks. Once, he left a note that said simply, "Do better." Rosa kept every note in a folder at home, studying them like test papers, determined to meet standards that were never quite explained but always expected to be understood. But here's what Robert didn't know about Rosa. He didn't know that she always worked an extra 30 minutes without clocking in because she wanted the house to be perfect. He didn't know that she noticed when he seemed tired or sad and she would straighten his desk just a little bit more carefully on those days, as if order in his study might somehow ease whatever was weighing on him. He didn't know that when she cleaned his bathroom, she saw the prescription bottles for blood pressure medication and cholesterol medication lined up by the sink like tiny warnings. He didn't know that she had learned CPR during a free community health class at Diego's school, taught by a nurse who said everyone should know how to save a life because you never know when that knowledge will matter. He didn't know that she prayed for him sometimes, in the quiet moments when she was dusting his bookshelf or changing his sheets. Not because he was kind to her, because he wasn't, but because he seemed so lonely, and Rosa knew what it felt like to be far from home, far from love, even when you were surrounded by beautiful things. Robert didn't know any of this, because he had never asked. Because to him, Rosa was simply the woman who cleaned, just another employee on the payroll, another person whose name he had to be reminded of whenever he signed checks. The night everything changed started like any other evening. Robert had spent the day in back-to-back meetings with investors about a new solar energy project in West Texas. He was under pressure. The deal was complicated. His competitors were circling. His own board of directors was questioning his strategy. He was used to being the smartest person in the room, but lately he had begun to feel his age in ways that frustrated him. His joints ached. His stamina wasn't what it used to be. He got winded, climbing stairs. His doctor had warned him about stress. His cardiologist had told him his heart was under strain, but Robert had ignored it all the way successful men often do, believing that willpower and wealth could overcome biology. He came home around 8 that evening. The chef had left dinner in the warming drawer of the kitchen. The butler had gone home for the night. The security guard was making his rounds of the property. Rosa had finished her shift hours earlier and was at home helping Diego with his homework. Robert ate dinner alone in the dining room, scrolling through emails on his phone. He felt a tightness in his chest, but dismissed it as indigestion. He took some antacid and went upstairs to his study to work on some documents his attorney needed by morning. At around 9:30, he decided to call it a night. He stood up from his desk, and that's when the tightness in his chest became something else entirely. It became a crushing pain that radiated down his left arm. It became a sensation like someone had placed a concrete block on his sternum and was pressing down with all their weight. The room tilted. Robert tried to call out, but no sound came. His legs gave out. He collapsed in the hallway just outside his study, his phone falling from his hand and skittering across the marble floor. The security guard was outside checking the perimeter. The cameras in that particular hallway had been broken for 2 weeks, waiting on a technician that kept rescheduling. Robert lay there, alone, his heart struggling, each beat more irregular than the last. Minutes passed. If you had asked Robert before that moment what he feared most, he might have said losing his company or his reputation or his wealth. But lying on that cold marble floor, unable to move, unable to call for help, he realized his greatest fear was dying alone, forgotten, in a house full of things but empty of people who truly knew him. This is where Rosa's story intersects with Robert's in a way that would change everything. Rosa had left her jacket at the mansion that day. It was her only warm jacket, and Diego had a field trip the next morning. She needed it. So, after putting Diego to bed, she asked her neighbor to listen for him, and she drove back to Highland Park. She used her key to enter through the service entrance at the back of the house. The mansion was dark and quiet. She assumed Robert had gone to bed. She headed up the back staircase that staff used, the one that led to the second floor where her supply closet was located. She had just reached the top of the stairs when she heard it. A sound, faint, almost like breathing, but wrong somehow. Labored, desperate. Rosa called out, "Mr. Jameson?" No response, just that sound. She followed it down the hall, and that's when she saw him. Robert Jameson, the billionaire who owned that mansion and everything in it, lying on the floor, his face gray, his lips turning blue, his eyes open but unfocused. For one terrible moment, Rosa froze. She had never touched Robert before beyond shaking his hand once when she was first hired. He wasn't just her employer. He was someone from a completely different world. But then her training kicked in. The CPR class, the instructor's voice in her head. If someone isn't breathing properly, you need to act fast. Every second matters. Rosa dropped to her knees beside him. "Mr. Jameson, can you hear me?" His eyes flickered toward her, but he couldn't speak. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? My employer. He's collapsed. He's having trouble breathing. I think it's his heart. Please send help. She gave them the address, her words tumbling over each other in panic and prayer. The dispatcher stayed on the line, calm and professional. "Ma'am, is he breathing?" Rosa bent close. "Yes, but barely." "His pulse?" She pressed her fingers to his neck the way the instructor had taught her. "Weak, too fast." "Okay, I need you to prepare to start CPR if he stops breathing. Help is on the way, but they're 12 minutes out." "Do you know CPR?" "Yes," Rosa said, though her voice shook. "Yes, I know it." Those 12 minutes felt like 12 hours. Rosa stayed beside Robert, monitoring his breathing, keeping him conscious, talking to him, even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "You're going to be okay, Mr. Jameson. Help is coming. Stay with me. Don't close your eyes." His hand moved slightly, and without thinking, Rosa took it in hers. His skin was cold and clammy. She squeezed his hand and kept talking, kept praying under her breath in Spanish, kept willing him to hold on. When his breathing stopped entirely, Rosa began chest compressions. She had only practiced this on a dummy in class, but now she was doing it on a real person, on her employer, on a man whose life was literally in her hands. She counted out loud, 1, 2, 3, 4, trying to remember the rhythm, trying to keep her panic from taking over. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. Again and again. Her arms burned, sweat dripped down her face, but she didn't stop. When the paramedics finally burst through the door, Rosa was still, performing CPR, tears streaming down her face, her entire body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. They took over immediately, hooking Robert up to equipment, loading him onto a stretcher. One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, touched Rosa's shoulder. "You saved his life," she said. "If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't started CPR, he would have died." Rosa stood in that hallway, her hands still shaking, watching as they carried Robert Jameson out of his own house. The security guard had finally appeared, confused and panicked. The neighbors' lights were coming on, and Rosa, exhausted and overwhelmed, sat down on the floor and cried. Not because she was a hero, but because she had been so scared, because she couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if she hadn't come back for her jacket, because she realized, maybe for the first time, that life is so fragile, even for people with all the money in the world. She called Carlos from the hospital where the ambulance had taken Robert. She had followed in her car, not because anyone asked her to, but because it felt wrong to just go home. She sat in the waiting room for hours, still wearing her cleaning clothes, waiting for news, waiting to know if the man whose house she cleaned every day was going to survive the night. Robert woke up 3 days later in a hospital room that looked more like a luxury hotel suite. His children were there. Michael standing by the window looking at his phone, Elizabeth in a chair, her designer purse in her lap, Jonathan pacing, nervous and uncomfortable in hospitals the way people who haven't experienced real hardship often are. His doctor, a cardiologist named Dr. Sarah Chen, explained what had happened. "You had a massive heart attack, Mr. Jameson. A widowmaker, we call it. The left anterior descending artery was almost completely blocked. If you hadn't received CPR immediately, if the ambulance had taken even 5 more minutes, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Robert's throat was dry. "Who gave me CPR?" "Your housekeeper," Dr. Chen said. "Rosa Martinez. She found you, called 911, and kept you alive until paramedics arrived. The hospital still has the recordings. She saved your life, Mr. Jameson. There's no question about that." Robert stared at the ceiling. Rosa. He could barely picture her face. He knew her name only because it was on the payroll. She had worked in his house for 8 years, and he had probably spoken directly to her fewer than 10 times, and she had saved his life. Why? His children were talking. Michael was discussing the company, who was handling what in Robert's absence. Elizabeth wanted to know when he could go home. Jonathan was asking about insurance coverage. None of them mentioned Rosa. It was as if she were still invisible, even now. When Robert was finally well enough to have visitors beyond immediate family, he asked to see Rosa. The request surprised everyone. The nurses, his children, his attorney, who had been hovering, worried about the company. Rosa came on a Saturday afternoon. She wore a simple dress, not her cleaning uniform, and she looked terrified. She stood at the door of his hospital room, uncertain whether she should come in. Robert gestured her forward. He looked different, smaller somehow. "Mr. Jameson," Rosa said quietly. He interrupted her. "Thank you." The words came out rough and awkward. He wasn't used to saying them and meaning them. Rosa nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm just glad you're okay." Robert looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time ever. "I need to know something," he said. Why did you come back that night?" Rosa's voice was soft. "I forgot my jacket. I needed it for my son. He's 9. He had a field trip." Robert felt something shift in his chest, and it wasn't his heart, this time. "You risked coming back late at night? Alone? For a jacket?" "It's my only warm jacket," she explained simply. "And Diego needed it." "Diego. His name. How old is your son?" 9. He's in 3rd grade. He wants to be an engineer." Robert was silent for a long moment. "You never told me you had a son." "You never asked," Rosa said, not unkindly, just stating a fact. Over the next 2 weeks, while Robert recovered in the hospital and then at home, something extraordinary happened. He started paying attention. He asked Rosa about her life, not in the distant, polite way wealthy people sometimes do with their staff, but with genuine curiosity. She told him about Diego, about how he loved math and science, about how he stayed up late at night reading library books by flashlight because he couldn't put them down. She told him about Carlos, about how hard he worked, about how some months they had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying Diego new shoes for school. She told him about her mother in Oaxaca, about sending money home, about the guilt of being here while her family was there. She told him about the CPR class, about how she almost didn't go because she was so tired after work, but the school nurse had practically begged parents to attend. "I'm so glad you went," Robert said. "Me too," Rosa whispered. Robert's recovery was slow. The heart attack had been severe. He needed rest, physical therapy, a complete change in diet and lifestyle. His doctor had been blunt. "Another heart attack will probably kill you, Mr. Jameson. You need to reduce stress, eat better, exercise, and frankly, figure out what actually matters in your life." For the first time in decades, Robert was forced to slow down, to think, to feel. And what he felt was a shame so profound it kept him awake at night. Here was a woman who had worked in his house for 8 years, who had cleaned his bathroom, made his bed, organized his books, who had been as much a part of his daily life as anyone, and he knew nothing about her. He had treated her like furniture. Less than that, because at least he noticed when furniture needed replacing. Meanwhile, his children visited dutifully, but without real presence. Michael talked about business strategies and market shares. Elizabeth complained about the humidity in Dallas and how much she missed her apartment in New York. Jonathan asked for a loan to start a new business venture, his 4th failed attempt. They never asked how Robert felt. They never sat with him in the quiet moments. They never held his hand the way Rosa had that night on the floor. Robert began to see his life with brutal clarity. He had built an empire but neglected a family. He had accumulated wealth but not wisdom. He had been respected but not loved. And the person who had saved his life was someone he had never bothered to know. 3 months after the heart attack, Robert called his attorney and his accountant to his study. He had made a decision. "I'm changing my will," he announced. Both men looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Jameson, maybe you should wait until you're fully recovered before making major financial decisions," his attorney suggested carefully. "I've never been more clear-headed in my life," Robert replied. Full scholarship through university, including graduate school if he wanted it. He was establishing a foundation in Rosa's name that would provide CPR training and heart health education to low-income communities in Dallas. He was giving Rosa a house, fully paid, in a safe neighborhood with good schools, and he was leaving her a significant portion of his estate. When the changes were made official, and Robert sat down with Rosa to explain what he had done, she couldn't speak. She just stared at him, tears running down her face. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Because you saved my life," Robert said. Rosa shook her head. "That's not a reason to do all this." "You saved my life too," Robert said quietly. "You just didn't know it needed saving." This is where the story should end, with a heartwarming redemption and gratitude, and a man transformed by near death. But this is real life, and in real life, money has a way of bringing out the worst in people. When Robert's children learned about the will changes, they were furious. They hired attorneys. They demanded their father undergo psychiatric evaluation, claiming he wasn't in his right mind. They accused Rosa of manipulation, of taking advantage of a sick old man. They told reporters that she had probably planned the whole thing, maybe even caused the heart attack somehow. The story made headlines. Billionaire changes will to favor housekeeper. Family claims exploitation. The battle over Robert Jameson's fortune. Rosa's face was on the news. Photographers followed her to work. Reporters called her phone constantly. Strangers on social media said terrible things about her, calling her a gold digger, a manipulator. Worse, she couldn't take Diego to school without people staring. Her neighbors, who had always been kind, started asking questions. The attention was overwhelming and cruel. Robert was devastated by his children's response, but not entirely surprised. He released a statement through his attorney that was published in the Dallas Morning News. I am 72 years old and of sound mind. I have built my wealth through shrewd decisions and careful planning, and I am making this decision with the same clarity I brought to every business deal I ever made. Rosa Martinez saved my life. Not just physically, though she did that too. She reminded me what it means to be human, to care about someone beyond what they can do for you. My children are angry because they believe they are entitled to my money simply because they share my DNA. But entitlement is not the same as deserving. Rosa showed me kindness when she had no reason to. She asked for nothing. She expected nothing, and that is precisely why she deserves what I am giving her. My children will still inherit more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. They will be fine. And if they choose to spend that inheritance on lawyers and bitterness instead of building something meaningful with their lives, that tells you everything you need to know about why I made this choice. The statement didn't stop the legal battles. Michael, Elizabeth, and Jonathan filed a lawsuit claiming undue influence. They demanded access to medical records, psychiatric evaluations, testimony from household staff. They dragged the case out for months, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, determined to prove that their father had been manipulated. Rosa wanted to give everything back. I don't want this, she told Robert through tears. I just wanted you to live. I don't want to hurt your family. You're not hurting them, Robert said gently. They're hurting themselves. But if you want to walk away, I understand. I won't force you to fight this battle. Rosa thought about it. She talked to Carlos. She prayed. She asked her priest for guidance, and then she made her decision. She would fight, not because she wanted the money, though God knew it would change everything for Diego, for her family, but because giving in to the children's bullying would be letting them rewrite what actually happened. It would be saying that kindness didn't matter, that saving someone's life was worth nothing if you were poor, that wealthy people had the right to treat service workers as less than human and face no consequences for that. The case went to court. Robert testified, weak but determined. Dr. Chen testified about the heart attack and Rosa's CPR. The 911 recording was played in court, Rosa's panicked voice begging for help, her careful counting during chest compressions. Character witnesses spoke about Rosa's integrity, her kindness, her reputation in the teen community. Robert's children presented their case too. They had experts claim that elderly people who experience near-death events often become emotionally attached to their caregivers. They suggested that Rosa had been strategic in her kindness, calculating. They pointed out that Robert had never shown interest in Rosa before the heart attack and questioned why he had changed so dramatically afterward. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The judge was a woman named Patricia Delgado, 63 years old, who had grown up in El Paso, the daughter of immigrant farm workers. When the arguments were finished and all the evidence had been presented, Judge Delgado delivered her ruling. I have reviewed the medical evidence, she said. I have listened to testimony from doctors, family members, staff, and the plaintiff herself, and I have come to a conclusion that I believe is both legally sound and morally just. Mr. Jameson suffered a near-fatal heart attack. That is not in dispute. Rosa Martinez saved his life through quick thinking and CPR training. That is also not in dispute. What is in dispute is whether Mr. Jameson's subsequent gratitude and changes to his estate planning constitute sound decision-making or undue influence. I find it deeply troubling that this family has chosen to interpret an act of genuine life-saving heroism as a calculated manipulation. The evidence shows that Rosa Martinez asked for nothing. She expected nothing. She returned to work as a housekeeper the very next week after saving Mr. Jameson's life at the same pay rate, doing the same job. If she were the manipulative gold digger that the plaintiffs have portrayed, does that make sense? Or does it make more sense that a decent person did a decent thing and a man who finally saw clearly decided to be decent in return? Judge Delgado looked directly at Michael, Elizabeth, and Jonathan. I also find it troubling that none of you mentioned Rosa Martinez in your initial statements about your father's recovery. You talked about medical care and insurance and business operations, but the woman who actually saved his life was invisible to you, just as she had been invisible to him for 8 years. Perhaps that's what this case is really about. Not money, but who gets to be seen, who gets to matter, and whether kindness from a poor person has the same value as kindness from a wealthy one. The court finds that Robert Jameson was of sound mind when he made changes to his estate planning. The court finds no evidence of undue influence or manipulation. The will stands as written. Case dismissed. Robert died 18 months later, not from another heart attack, but peacefully in his sleep. He spent those final months doing something he had never really done before, living. He had dinner with Rosa and her family every Sunday. He went to Diego's school plays and science fairs. He taught the boy about business and investing, but more importantly, he learned from him about enthusiasm and wonder and asking why. He reconciled partially with his children. Michael eventually apologized, though it was stiff and uncomfortable. Elizabeth sent a card. Jonathan never called, but Robert made peace with that. You can't force people to grow, he told Rosa. You can only decide who you want to be. The foundation they had created together, the Rosa Martinez Heart Health Initiative, trained over 5,000 people in CPR in its first year. 3 lives were saved by people who had taken those classes. 3 families didn't have to lose someone they loved because a stranger knew what to do in an emergency. At Robert's funeral, which was held at a small church instead of the cathedral his family had suggested, Rosa gave the eulogy. She spoke about a man who had learned late in life what mattered most. Who had the courage to change, even when change was difficult and embarrassing and costly? Who chose gratitude over pride? Who saw her, finally, as a human being worthy of respect and kindness? I didn't save Mr. Jameson's life because I expected anything in return, Rosa said, her voice steady now. Strong. I saved his life because that's what you do when someone needs help. You don't ask what they can do for you. You don't calculate whether they've earned your compassion. You just help. And what Mr. Jameson did after that, the changes he made, the generosity he showed, that wasn't about paying me back. That was about him finally becoming the person he always could have been. Money doesn't make you good. Power doesn't make you good. Being willing to see the humanity in people who have less than you, that's what makes you good. The church was packed. Rosa's community had come out in force. Her family from Oaxaca had flown in. Diego sat in the front row in a suit that Robert had bought him, crying quietly. Carlos had his arm around his wife. And in the back, almost hidden, sat Michael, Elizabeth, and Jonathan, listening to a woman they had tried to destroy, giving grace to their father and, by extension, to them. After the service, as people filed out into the autumn sunshine, Diego came up to his mother. "Mom," he said, wiping his eyes, "when I grow up, I want to be like him." Rosa pulled her son close. "Which him?" she asked. "Mr. Jameson?" Diego shook his head. "No. Like you. I want to be someone who helps people. someone who does the right thing even when it's hard, someone who saves lives. Rosa held her boy and cried, and this time they were good tears. Tears of pride and hope and the knowledge that kindness, real kindness, never dies. It just gets passed down, person to person, life to life, like the most valuable inheritance you can leave behind. Today, Diego Martinez is 21 years old. He's studying biomedical engineering at the University of Texas, specializing in heart health technology. He's developing affordable CPR training devices for underserved communities. He volunteers at the Rosa Martinez Heart Health Initiative, teaching classes in both English and Spanish. He carries a photo of Robert Jameson in his wallet, right next to a photo of his mother on the night she saved a billionaire's life. Carlos still works construction, but now he owns his own small company. Rosa still cleans houses, because she says the work keeps her grounded, but she also runs the foundation. She speaks at schools and community centers. She trains others to do what she did, to recognize a heart attack, to not freeze, to act. And she tells Robert's story, again and again, to anyone who will listen. She tells it not because it's a story about money or wills or inheritance, but because it's a story about what happens when we finally see each other. When we look past wealth and status and all the walls we build between ourselves, when we recognize that the person we've been ignoring might be the person who saves us, not just physically, but in every way that matters. She tells the story because she wants people to understand something important. That heroism isn't about being special or strong or fearless. It's about being present. It's about paying attention. It's about caring enough to act when the moment comes. And the moment will come for all of us. We will all be either the person who needs saving or the person who can save. Sometimes we're both, on the same day, in ways we don't even recognize until years later. When people ask Rosa if she regrets the legal battle, the headlines, the hate from strangers, the family torn apart by money and pride, she always gives the same answer: no. Because it taught me something I needed to know. That standing up for what's right is going to cost you something. People will question your motives. They'll try to make you small again, make you invisible again. And you have to decide if you're willing to pay that price. If you're willing to stay visible, even when visibility is painful. Robert Jameson gave me money, yes. But more than that, he gave me his story. The world see him change. He let them see that even someone with all the power and wealth in the world can be wrong, can be lonely, can be saved by someone they underestimated, and that's a gift worth more than any amount in a bank account. So now, let me ask you something. Think about the people in your life who you don't really see. The person who cleans your office, the server at the restaurant you visit every week, the person who delivers your mail or bags your groceries. Do you know their names? Do you know their stories? Do you understand that they're fighting battles and dreaming dreams and doing their best just like you? What would happen if you really saw them? If you asked about their lives? If you treated them not as service providers but as human beings worthy of respect and kindness? You might be surprised. You might find that the person you've been looking past has something to teach you, something to give you, something that could change your life if you're willing to let it. Robert Jameson learned this lesson the hardest way possible. On a cold marble floor, unable to breathe, realizing too late how much time he had wasted. Don't wait for a heart attack. Don't wait until you're facing death to understand what matters. See people now. Because sometimes, the person you underestimate is the one holding your life in their hands, and sometimes, learning to see them is what saves you both. So where are you watching from? Have you ever had someone in your life who was invisible to you until they did something extraordinary? Or maybe you've been that invisible person, the one who helped without recognition, who gave without expecting anything back? Drop your stories in the comments. I read every single one, because these stories matter. Your experiences matter, and the more we share them, the more we understand that we're all connected. We're all dependent on each other in ways we often forget, until the moment we can't anymore. until the moment someone like Rosa Martinez shows up with her CPR training and her compassion and her courage and reminds us what it means to be human. This story isn't just about one billionaire and one housekeeper in Dallas, Texas. It's about all of us. It's about the choices we make every single day about who we see and who we ignore, about who we value and who we dismiss, about whether we're willing to recognize that the accident of birth, the luck of circumstance, the privilege of wealth, none of that makes someone more human than anyone else. None of that means their life matters more or their kindness matters less. I want you to think about something for a moment. Really think about it. If you collapsed right now, if your heart stopped beating, who would be there? Who would notice? Who would care enough to try to save you? The answer might surprise you. It might not be the people you expect. It might not be your family or your friends or the people you think are closest to you. It might be a stranger. It might be someone whose name you don't even know. Someone who serves you coffee every morning. Someone who parks your car. Someone who cleans your home. And when that person saves you, when they perform that act of incredible humanity with no guarantee of recognition or reward, what will you do? Will you go back to ignoring them? Will you treat it as a transaction, a debt to be paid and forgotten, or will you do what Robert Jameson finally did? Will you wake up? Will you change? Will you recognize that you've been given a gift, not just of life, but of perspective? The truth is, most of us are more like Robert Jameson than we want to admit. We move through the world half asleep, barely noticing the people around us unless they serve a purpose for us. We measure value in dollars and status. We create hierarchies where some people matter more than others based on arbitrary measures of success. We tell ourselves we're good people because we're not actively cruel, but we don't realize that indifference is its own form of cruelty, that invisibility is its own form of violence. Rosa Martinez didn't save Robert Jameson's life because she was looking for recognition. She saved it because she had been trained to save lives, and when the moment came, she acted. That's all. It was that simple and that profound. But what happened afterward, the legal battles, the public scrutiny, the family's anger, all of that revealed something important about our society. It revealed that we're uncomfortable with the idea that poor people, immigrants, service workers, that they might deserve gratitude and generosity from the wealthy people they serve. We've constructed elaborate systems to keep people in their place, to maintain hierarchies, to ensure that kindness flows downward as charity, but never upward as obligation. When Rosa received Robert's gift, when she was elevated from invisible housekeeper to heir and foundation director, it disrupted that order. It suggested that maybe the person cleaning your house is just as worthy of respect and opportunity as the person whose house is being cleaned. And that makes people deeply uncomfortable. The Jameson children's lawsuit wasn't really about money. They were all already wealthy. They would inherit more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. The lawsuit was about power and control, and the belief that they had a right to their father's estate simply because of their last name. It was about the assumption that blood matters more than character, that family is more important than humanity, that a lifetime of indifference shouldn't have consequences. But Robert Jameson, in those final 18 months of his life, taught a different lesson. He taught that it's never too late to change, that you can spend 70 years being one kind of person and then decide, in your final chapter, to be someone else entirely. That regret doesn't have to be passive. It can be active. It can be transformative. He looked at his children and saw entitlement and distance, and he looked at Rosa and saw sacrifice and compassion, and he made a choice about what he wanted his legacy to be. Not the empire he built or the deals he made or the wealth he accumulated, but whether he had the courage, at the end of his life, to be honest about who mattered and why. Some people called him foolish. Some said he was senile or manipulated, but others saw it differently. They saw a man who finally understood what Jesus meant when he said, "The last shall be first." What Buddha meant about compassion, what every moral teacher throughout history has tried to tell us, that the measure of your life isn't what you have, but what you give. Not to people who can give back, but to people who can't. There's a detail about that night that Rosa has never shared publicly until now. When she was performing CPR on Robert, when she was counting compressions and praying and trying to keep him alive, she wasn't thinking about him as a billionaire. She wasn't thinking about his mansion or his companies or his wealth. She was thinking about her own father, back in Oaxaca, who had died of a heart attack when she was 19, who had collapsed in their small kitchen while her mother screamed and Rosa stood frozen, not knowing what to do, watching him die because she didn't have the training or the knowledge to save him. Every compression she performed on Robert Jameson, every breath she forced into his lungs, she was doing for her father. She was saving the man she couldn't save. She was refusing to be helpless again. That's what she was thinking about. Not money, not gratitude, not recognition. Just, please don't let another person die when I could have done something. Please, let me be enough this time. When Robert learned this, months later, when Rosa finally told him in a quiet moment, he wept. He understood then that his life had been saved not by calculation or obligation, but by love. By a daughter's grief transformed into action, by the kind of pain that either destroys you or teaches you to save others so they don't feel the same loss. And he realized that this was the real gift. Not that she had saved him, but that she had trusted him enough to tell him why, to let him see her grief, to treat him as someone worthy of her story. Diego's journey is worth mentioning too, because it illustrates how change ripples outward. Before his mother saved Robert Jameson, Diego was a bright kid in an underfunded school, dreaming of becoming an engineer but knowing that dream was probably impossible. College cost money they didn't have. His parents worked constantly and still struggled to pay rent. He had been taught, in 1,000 small ways, that people like him didn't get those opportunities, that he should be realistic, that he should be grateful for whatever he could get. But then everything changed. Not just because of the money, though the scholarship fund certainly changed the practical reality of his future, but because he watched his mother fight. He watched her stand up in court and refuse to be made small. He watched her give speeches and run a foundation and treat herself as someone whose voice mattered. He watched his father support her even when it was scary, even when people said terrible things, even when it would have been easier to walk away. He watched Robert Jameson, this powerful, wealthy man, humble himself and apologize and listen and learn. And Diego learned that people can change, that systems can be challenged, that kindness is powerful, that poverty doesn't mean powerlessness, that his mother, who cleaned other people's houses, was a hero, that her work had value even before she saved anyone's life, that she had always mattered, the world just hadn't been willing to see it. Now when Diego teaches CPR classes through the foundation, when he works with young people from communities like the one he grew up in, he tells them something important. He says, "You don't have to wait for permission to matter. You don't have to wait for someone to see you. You already matter. You already have value. And when the moment comes, when someone needs help, you act. You don't worry about whether you're qualified enough or important enough, or whether anyone will thank you. You just do what needs to be done." Because that's what my mother did. She didn't ask if she was allowed to save a billionaire's life. She didn't wonder if someone like her had the right to touch someone like him. She just knew he needed help, and she could give it. So she did. And everything else, all the recognition and the money and the foundation and the changed will, all of that came after. Not because she was looking for it, but because one person finally saw clearly and decided to be grateful. The students listen to Diego and you can see something shift in their faces. The realization that they have power. That their actions matter. That heroism isn't something that happens to other people in movies. It's something that happens in hallways and parking lots and anywhere someone needs help and someone else is willing to give it. The foundation has trained over 23,000 people now. 8 lives have been saved by graduates of their program. 8 families that didn't have to plan funerals. 8 people who got second chances because a stranger knew what to do. But here's what keeps Rosa up at night sometimes. Here's what she struggles with even now. She knows that there are millions of people like her. People working invisible jobs, cleaning and cooking and caring for others. People who are kind and hardworking and decent. People who would absolutely save a life if given the chance. And most of them will never get what she got. Most of them will save someone, or help someone, or sacrifice for someone, and they'll go back to their minimum wage jobs and their struggles and their invisibility. Because what happened to Rosa was extraordinary. Not the saving, but the recognition, the gratitude. The billionaire who actually changed and meant it. That's the part that almost never happens, and Rosa worries that her story will become a story that lets people off the hook, that wealthy people will hear it and think, see, the system works, good things happen to good people, without recognizing that she's the exception, that for every Rosa Martinez who gets seen and rewarded, there are thousands who don't, who work just as hard, sacrifice just as much, and die in poverty. That's what she talks about in her speeches now. She doesn't just tell the heartwarming story, she asks the hard questions. She says, why should it take a billionaire's near-death experience for a housekeeper to be treated with dignity? Why should my son's education depend on someone's gratitude instead of being a right? Why do we celebrate when wealthy people are generous instead of building a world where generosity isn't necessary because everyone has what they need? Some people don't like when Rosa talks like this. They preferred her when she was just the grateful maid, the humble immigrant who knew her place. They wanted the story to be about individual kindness, not systemic change. They wanted her to say thank you and be quiet. But Robert Jameson, before he died, told her something important. He said, Rosa, don't let them make you small again. Don't let them use my gift to silence you. Use it to speak louder. Tell the truth about what you've seen, about how I treated you before and why it was wrong, about how the world treats people like you and why it needs to change. That's how you honor what we had, not by being grateful and quiet, but by being angry and loud and demanding better. So that's what Rosa does. She honors Robert not by pretending he was always good, but by telling the truth about how he changed and why everyone else should change too. She uses the foundation, the platform, the resources he gave her to push for policy changes, living wages for domestic workers, healthcare access for immigrants, mandatory CPR training in all schools, protections against wage theft, all the things that would have made her life easier before she ever met Robert Jameson, all the things that would mean the next Rosa Martinez doesn't have to depend on luck and a billionaire's conscience to survive. And the thing is, it's working. 3 cities have adopted living wage ordinances for domestic workers, partially because of the Foundation's advocacy. 2 states have added CPR to their high school graduation requirements. Hundreds of immigrant workers have received legal aid and recovered stolen wages. The ripples keep spreading outward, touching lives that Rosa will never meet, in ways that can't be measured in dollars. Michael Jameson, Robert's oldest son, did eventually come around. It took 3 years after his father's death. 3 years of bitterness and resentment and watching his own children ask questions about their grandfather and why they never got to know him. 3 years of his wife asking him if he was proud of how he acted, if this was the legacy he wanted to leave. He reached out to Rosa through a letter. He didn't ask for anything. He just apologized. He said he had been so focused on what he thought he deserved that he never stopped to think about what his father needed, about how lonely he must have been, about how Rosa gave him something that Michael never could, which was presence without agenda. The letter was awkward and stiff, but it was honest. Rosa wrote back. She invited him to one of the Foundation's training events. Michael came. He watched his father's name on the banner. The Rosa Martinez Heart Health Initiative, sponsored by the Jameson Family Foundation. He watched Rosa teach a room full of teenagers how to save lives. He watched Diego demonstrate compressions on a training dummy, and he cried. Afterward, Michael asked if he could help, if there was something he could contribute beyond money. Rosa thought about it. About the anger and the fear and the realization that you were wrong, because there are a lot of wealthy people who think like you thought, who see their workers as less than human, and maybe if they heard from someone like them, someone who changed, maybe it would mean something. So Michael started speaking too, at business conferences, at family wealth management seminars, at country clubs and boardrooms. He tells his story, about how he sued the woman who saved his father's life, about how he was so concerned with inheritance that he forgot to be concerned with his father's happiness, about how he almost let pride and entitlement destroy any chance of a real relationship before it was too late. He tells them, look at your life, look at the people you employ. Do you know them? Do you see them? Or are they just functions, just roles? Just people who exist to make your life more comfortable. Because I promise you, if something happens to you, if you collapse or crash or need help, those people you've been ignoring might be the only ones there, and you'll be hoping they care enough to save you, even though you never cared enough to see them. Some people listen. Some people change their behavior. Some people start learning their housekeepers' names and asking about their families and paying them more and treating them better. It's not a revolution. It's not even close to enough. But it's something. And Michael does this because he knows he can never fully make up for how he acted. He can never give his father back those years of distance. He can never undo the lawsuit or the cruel things he said about Rosa, but he can use his privilege, his access to rooms where people like Rosa aren't invited, to tell a story that needs to be told. That's his way of honoring his father's change. By changing, too. By refusing to let the story end with bitterness. By proving that if Robert Jameson could learn to see people differently at 72, then anyone can. Elizabeth and Jonathan never came around. Elizabeth sent a card when Robert died but didn't attend the funeral. She moved to London and rarely speaks to anyone in the family. Jonathan burned through his inheritance on failed business ventures and eventually declared bankruptcy. He reached out to Michael asking for money, which Michael gave him, but with conditions. That he attend therapy, that he get a job, any job, and keep it for at least a year, that he volunteer somewhere helping people less fortunate than himself. Jonathan lasted 6 months before disappearing again. Some people change. Some people can't or won't, and that's a hard truth that Rosa has had to accept. She can't save everyone. She can't make everyone see what Robert finally saw. Some hearts are too hardened. Some people are too invested in their grievances and their sense of entitlement to let go and grow. And that's sad, but it's not her responsibility. Her responsibility is to keep doing the work, to keep teaching, to keep speaking truth, to keep making sure that what happened to her, both the near tragedy and the unlikely gift, to keep making sure it means something beyond just her own life. Carlos, her husband, is her anchor through all of this. He didn't change much, which Rosa loves about him. He still works construction. He still comes home tired and dusty. He still makes terrible jokes and plays soccer with Diego on weekends and kisses her forehead every morning before he leaves for work. He keeps her grounded. When the attention gets overwhelming, when people want her to speak at conferences or do interviews or travel for the foundation, Carlos reminds her of who she is. "You're Rosa," he says. "You're the woman who came home for a jacket so our son wouldn't be cold. That's who you are. Everything else is just what happened after. Here's what Rosa wants you to understand. What she wishes everyone understood. Saving Robert Jameson's life wasn't the extraordinary part. Anyone with CPR training could have done that. The extraordinary part was that she was there, that she came back for a jacket, that she didn't ignore the sound in the hallway, that she didn't freeze or panic or decide it wasn't her problem. The extraordinary part was that she cared. And that's not something special about Rosa. That's something special about humanity when we allow ourselves to be human, when we don't let fear or indifference or social hierarchies stop us from helping each other. Every single day, people make choices. They choose to see or to look away. They add up. They create the world we live in. Robert Jameson made the choice, for most of his life, to look away, to not see the people serving him, to treat them as interchangeable, replaceable, invisible, and it took a heart attack, literal death at his doorstep, for him to finally understand what he had been missing, how much richness and humanity and connection he had sacrificed in his pursuit of wealth and status. Rosa made a different choice that night. She chose to see, to care, to act, not because it would benefit her, not because she knew it would lead anywhere, but because that's what you do when someone needs help. You help. Period. That's the choice all of us face, every single day, in big ways and small ones. The homeless person asking for change, the coworker struggling with a project, the elderly neighbor who might need groceries, the kid being bullied, the friend going through depression, the stranger who dropped something in the parking lot. Do we see them? Do we help? Or do we look away? Tell ourselves, it's not our problem, someone else will handle it. We're too busy, too tired, too focused on our own lives? Rosa's mother back in Oaxaca died last year. She never got to see the foundation or the impact her daughter was making, but she knew. Rosa had sent her photos and videos. She had explained everything, and her mother had said something before she died that Rosa thinks about constantly. She said, "Mija, you think you saved that man's life, but really, God put you in that place to save your own, to show you that you matter, that your kindness matters, that the way you were raised, to help people, to care about people, that it's not weakness, it's power. And now you know. Now, you can never forget." Rosa understands now what her mother meant. That night changed her too. It gave her confidence. It gave her voice. It showed her that she didn't have to accept invisibility, that she could demand to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with dignity. That being poor didn't mean being powerless. That immigrant didn't mean irrelevant. That housekeeper didn't mean less than. She had always known these things intellectually. But knowing and feeling are different things. Felt the value of her life and her work and her choices. And once you feel that, you can't unfeel it. You can't go back to being invisible, even if people want you to. Diego will graduate next year. He's already been accepted into graduate programs at 3 universities. He's developing a device that can teach CPR through augmented reality, making training more accessible and affordable. He's dating a girl named Maria who's studying social work. He calls his mother every Sunday and tells her about his week, about his research, about his dreams, and sometimes he asks her about that night, about what she was thinking, about whether she was scared, and Rosa tells him the truth. She says, "I was terrified. I thought I might do it wrong. I thought he might die anyway. I thought I wasn't enough. But I tried anyway, because not trying wasn't an option." That's what I want you to understand, Micho. You don't have to be fearless. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. You just have to care enough to act. That's the lesson Rosa teaches in her classes. That's what the foundation is really about. Not just CPR technique, though that's important, but the willingness to step forward when someone needs help, to overcome the fear that you'll do it wrong, or that it's not your place, or that someone more qualified should handle it. Because here's the truth. In the moment when someone is dying, when seconds matter, there is no one more qualified than the person who is there, than you. You are exactly qualified enough because you're present, and you care, and you're willing to try. That's all it takes. That's all it's ever taken. Robert Jameson understood this by the end. He used to say, in those final months, that he had spent his whole life trying to be the smartest person in the room, the richest, the most powerful. And it was all worthless. What mattered was being the person who showed up, who paid attention, who cared. He had been surrounded by smart people, powerful people, wealthy people his entire life, But Rosa, who had none of those things, was the one who saved him, because she was there, because she cared, because she acted. "That's the only qualification that matters," he would say. And if I had understood that 50 years ago, I would have lived a completely different life. I would have been a completely different person. But I'm grateful I understood it before the end. So here we are at the end of this story, and I want to ask you again, who are you in this story? Are you Robert Jameson, before the heart attack, moving through life, focused on your goals and your status and your comfort, barely noticing the people who serve you? Are you Michael, Elizabeth, and Jonathan, angry that someone you underestimated received something you thought you deserved, willing to fight and hurt people to maintain a hierarchy that benefits you? Or are you Rosa, present, attentive, willing to help even when it's inconvenient, even when there's no reward, even when the person you're helping has never done anything for you? The truth is, we're all a little bit of everyone. We all have moments of kindness and moments of indifference, moments of generosity and moments of selfishness. The question isn't whether you're a good person or a bad person. The question is, what choice are you making right now? In this moment? With the person in front of you? Because that's all we ever have. Moments. Chances to see or to look away, to help or to keep walking, to be the person someone needs or to be just another person who didn't care enough to stop. Robert Jameson got a second chance, not just to live, but to change, to become better, to make amends for years of indifference. Most of us don't get such a clear wake-up call. Most of us don't almost die and get saved by someone we've been ignoring. Most of us just keep going, day after day, never quite realizing what we're missing, who we're missing, until it's too late. So don't wait for a heart attack. Don't wait for tragedy to teach you what matters. Look around you right now. Who are the invisible people in your life? Who serves you, helps you, makes your life easier, that you've never really seen? Learn their names. Ask about their lives. Treat them like the human beings they are, not because it might benefit you someday, but because it's right. Because they matter. Because every single person you encounter is fighting battles you know nothing about and deserves basic dignity and respect. And if you're someone who feels invisible, if you're the Rosa Martinez in someone else's story, I want you to know something. You matter. Your work matters. Your kindness matters, even if no one sees it. Even if no one thanks you. Even if you. Another, if no one sees and enjoin. Another NPs and enjoin, never get recognition or reward. You matter because you're human, and humanity is valuable all by itself. You don't need a billionaire to validate you. You don't need a courtroom to prove your worth. You don't need headlines or foundations or money in the bank. You already have worth, inherent, undeniable, infinite worth. And the world is better because you're in it, because you show up, because you care. Because when someone needs help, you don't ask whether they deserve it or whether you'll benefit from it. You just help. That's heroism. That's what changes the world. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those happen sometimes, but small, consistent, daily choices to be kind, to be present, to care, to see people, to help when you can, to be there. One more thing before we close. The 911 recording from that night, the one that was played in court, it's available online now. You can listen to it if you want. You can hear Rosa's voice. Shaking but determined, counting compressions, begging Robert to hold on. And what you'll hear, underneath the panic and the fear, is love, not romantic love, but human love. The kind that says, "You're a stranger to me, but I refuse to let you die. I refuse to give up. I refuse to be helpless. Hold on. Please hold on. Help is coming." That's what we all need to hear sometimes. When we're struggling, when we're scared, when we feel like we're dying, whether literally or metaphorically. We need someone to refuse to give up on us, to hold our hand, to do everything they can to keep us alive, to say, "You matter. Hold on. Help is coming." And we need to be that person for others, the one who refuses to walk away, who refuses to pretend they don't see, who refuses to let indifference win. Rosa Martinez saved Robert Jameson's life on a cold Tuesday night in Dallas. But really, they saved each other. He gave her resources and visibility and validation. She gave him humanity and purpose and a chance to become who we should have been all along. That's what happens when we finally see each other. When we break down the walls of wealth and status and all the barriers we construct, we save each other. We become more human. We remember why we're here. Not to accumulate or achieve or dominate, but to connect, to care, to be there for each other. So, where are you watching from? Who have you been ignoring? Who could you see differently starting today? Who needs you to show up, to pay attention, to care? Comment below. Share your story. Tell me about a time someone saw you when you felt invisible, or a time you finally saw someone you had been missing. Because these stories matter. They remind us what's possible. They show us who we can be. If we're brave enough to try. If we care enough to act. If we're willing, like Rosa, to come back for a jacket and save a life and change everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being here. Now go. See someone. Help someone. Be the person who shows up. Be the person who cares. Be the person who refuses to walk away. Be Rosa Martinez. Be the better version of Robert Jameson. Be the change the world needs. One moment at a time. One person at a time. One choice at a time. Until we've built a world where no one is invisible, where everyone matters, where kindness is just how we live. That's the world Rosa is building. One CPR class at a time. Join her. Start today. Start now. Because someone, somewhere, is waiting for you to see them, to help them, to save them. Don't make them wait any longer.